excited and also a bit nervous. Hi.
Hello.
Wow, you're up and bright and early today in London.
Yes.
Thank you so
And you
much.
are the OG of Uncharted Spaces, Naina.
You were waiting to say that, weren't you?
But it's true. You were the first Indian person on Twitter. I don't know how many of your followers actually know that.
Yeah,
And
but
I
it's,
think they also don't know how much experimentation you have done with different platforms.
I
So
have,
I'm
yeah.
saying nothing that I can't kind of back up with evidence.
Oh, thank you. Always. You have always encouraged me with very kind words. I really always appreciate that. And
Thank
I'm
you.
actually really nervous having you on because I keep telling people who have told about you that you are one of the smartest people I know. You are whip smart. Like you just get things. You know how everything is connected. You can see patterns before anyone else's brain registers it. And I've always known that since I met you. And so, yeah, I'm like nervous. My ears are like fully red.
Do not be nervous. We all do what we do, where we are, what we see, where we are standing and sitting. So that's what we are doing. But we are live across Australia and the UK.
Yeah.
Imagine.
Yeah, I know. I know. It's honestly, I never thought that I would have you on the podcast. I didn't even think I would have a podcast. So, yeah, here we are.
Here we
So
are. Yes. And
it's
today is launch day.
launch day. Yes, that's what I was going to say. It's the launch day for your book. It's called Uncharted Spaces. There it is. Yes. Can you tell me a bit about the cover? What does it mean?
So do you see this pair of
Yes.
glasses?
Yeah.
This obviously many gamers and people will recognize them as virtual reality glasses, right?
Yeah.
And the idea is to see. I was speaking with a community of board directors yesterday, and one of the questions somebody asked was, how do you see the beginning of something?
Ah, yes.
How so you start to see when you actually engage with the world and you observe without feeling the pressure to react,
Huh.
right? And you know, when whether people do Zen Buddhism or they read Franklian psychology or whatever, the point is when you see something, most people are, even when we are talking, most people are listening with an intention to react to something or respond to something
Yeah.
rather than just listening and sitting with it and saying, okay, and making sense of it and then responding. So the answer I gave her, more or less, was when you see something, it is not that you are seeing something. The purpose is to bring others along, make them
Mm.
understand what you're saying. And I
Mm.
gave several examples from the last 10 years. It was a private event, so I was able to be more free, where you see something and you know that its impact is going to be enormous.
Mm.
But when people hear it for the first time, they want to ask you, but how do you know? And it used to irk me a lot because I know because I've been observing, right? But now I simply ask them, do you want the 3 minute version or do you want the 30-year version? Because the 3 minute version essentially is about sending them the links that they might have to read themselves and make sense of. And 30-year version is when I'm actually willing to unpack all the steps till they understand where I am going with my thinking. And I think it is important to be able to do that in that sense. So to your coming back to your question about what do the glasses mean, they're actually
Mhm.
saying, see, look.
Mm.
You
Okay.
remember those childhood books we had, which actually the most important word there was look.
Yeah.
I have a poster of Robert Fulghum. All I
Mhm.
really need to know I learnt in kindergarten. And there is a bit in there. And then remember the Dick and Jane books and the first word you learnt, the biggest word of all, look,
Look. Uh,
and therefore the glasses.
therefore the glasses. Okay. So you're basically saying that Uncharted, but it's interesting, the beginning of something. I feel like a lot of us spend life on autopilot. So it's not really something that a lot of us are aware of when, even if we do encounter something that is like that. But that's why since I've known you, one term that you introduced me to was metacognition. And I've always associated that word with you, Shefali. So it's, how did when did it come into your awareness? Have you always had that? And can you kind of explain it to a layperson, and how does it inform your life?
I think the key thing is that what we do is what we get engrossed in. But
Hmm.
the learning and the transferability or the lift and shift or its applicability to other parts of our life
Hmm.
come when we abstract one layer up, right? And then you say, okay, this is basically what we are doing. So, for example, you solve problems in engineering and in
Hmm.
anything else in life, right? And you solve the problem, but you're not thinking about all the skills you have used there. They're the exact same skills you will bring anywhere else.
Hmm.
I tell my students and I tell my friends who listen, um, the best use of our education, formal education, is to apply the principles to our own life. We
Hmm.
learn a lot of abstract principles, but we somehow reserve them for our work,
True.
right? So essentially, recognizing the abstract principle allows us to see their applicability in multiple contexts.
Hmm.
And the more you apply those things, those metacognitive principles, to a range of contexts, you start to see the similarities. Back to the word look. You start to see the similarities and the dissimilarities between different contexts, which then allows you to learn from other contexts. There are a lot of
Hmm.
things some industries do, but because most people working in any given industry work in their industry, they
Yeah.
don't really learn from another industry.
Yeah.
And when someone comes along from another industry and says, how about this? The first reaction is to protect what they have. The second
Yeah.
is to dismiss, or the other way around. It takes a few steps to get people to see, well, what they are doing is about these principles. These principles also apply to you.
Yeah.
And you will remember, I think, was it that particular class you covered? You did a photo feature on one of my classes, right?
Yes. Yes.
And I used to teach two courses at the time. One of them was called Society and Technology. And Society and Technology was a course which uh, my students didn't quite appreciate, I think, at that time.
Sure.
But one of my students has written an endorsement in the book, and he is attending the book launch event this evening as well. And essentially, in the conversations with him, we have figured that everything we were talking about was about network industries. People don't think of road networks as networks. People think of internet as a network. They think of
Yes.
mobile phone networks. They think of probably water industry as a network. But we live
Hmm.
between networks everywhere. Now that is a metacognitive point. When you start to see the connectivity of various things and the
Hmm.
value is created when something moves from one node to another,
Hmm.
right? Like you are one node in Australia, I'm one node here. But using the internet as a pathway, we are hopefully creating some value which people can go back and reflect and say, right, where else in my life can
Yeah.
I use this principle of creating value through exchange, whether it's an
Hmm.
exchange of ideas, whether it is, a truck driving from a warehouse flow, whether it is electrons, which is electricity, whether it is water flow. That kind of ability to see the commonality between different unconnected looking
Yeah.
spaces is what
Yeah.
I really mean by metacognition. You essentially
Hmm.
see the common abstract themes rather than the particularities of that
Hmm.
instance.
Hmm.
And that's what I have always tried to say. And I know what you're thinking of when you ask this question. I have a brand called Metacognita. You designed
Yes.
the logo for it.
Yes.
So yes, that's when we first had this conversation. It was many years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought it would be interesting for the audience to kind of understand where you come from, because I know
Mhm.
we are talking about your book, and this is your first book, yeah? But
It
you
is
have,
my first book. I
yeah.
love the hopefulness in what people. kind of indicate when they say first book, because a second is expected. Okay.
Excellent.
Yes.
Yes, go for it. Yeah. But
Mm.
also, what you said that we don't really see the connection between different industries. I would go as far as to say that sometimes within the same company, for example, people don't even see the connectivity between different departments, where
Yeah.
they could actually get together and create a lot more value for the company in that sense. Because just because if they work together, then they know a little bit about each other's departments and their work. So
Mm.
yeah, you're right. This ability of metacognition. Do you think this is something we can learn and practice, or you're born with it?
I think we can learn. I mean, one of the reasons why I teach is essentially that
Hmm.
everything that I know is, it's not like I was born with that knowledge. We learn.
Yeah. Okay.
And some of it is self-driven, and some of it is somebody can teach us. But there are
Hmm.
two themes that I talk about early in the book that have, when I reflect on it, that have guided me and that keep me going, is curiosity and patience.
Yes.
Because you don't have to, just because you're curious doesn't mean you want it now, now, now.
I
Some
I do
things
that a
don't,
lot.
yeah, I know. Some things just don't happen that way, right?
Hmm.
Look at how many years we have known each other. We couldn't have made it happen in one day.
Yeah.
Time
I
had to
agree.
pass for its value to be crystallized and realized and so on. And
Hmm.
similarly, with learning something in depth and detail and carrying your curiosity with you to learn the next thing about it and next thing about it. So those two things are important. But to your earlier point about organizations not realizing value they can create. So I'll say two things with respect to, the themes in the book, for example. So for a board director's job,
Hmm.
you may come up the finance route and be the CFO, or a marketing person and be the CMO. But when you're on the board, you're not the custodian of that function.
Hmm.
Your job is actually to widen out and be able to ask questions about everything that's going on in the business.
Yeah.
And it is somewhat unfair to expect somebody who spent their life in one function to come up. They have reached, I describe it as a totem pole, reaching the top
Yeah.
of a totem pole. And then they go to this other totem pole and they're supposed to suddenly go from vertical to horizontal. Doesn't
Yeah.
happen overnight, right? It takes a while to get used to it. And how people um, react to that sometimes is by becoming micro interfering board directors into the job of the person they used to be. And that's
Yeah.
not a good sign. And I have
Yeah.
some quotes in the book from people who dislike a CEO getting on their board and then telling the CEO how to run the company, right?
Hmm.
So that's one. We need that the broader general business awareness. The second thing I would relate to is what we are all trying to do with generative AI. It is not a question of take this workflow, add generative AI, and stir. This is essentially another opportunity, if people wanted to take it, is to take a step up, look
Hmm.
at the process of what can be redesigned, which
Hmm.
processes are here serving nobody in particular,
Yeah.
just the people who are doing the processes, not serving the organization, not serving the strategic goals, not serving the shareholders or the stakeholders. Can we redesign them? Now, that is
Hmm.
almost too big a change management project. So, what people are doing is that they are taking little processes,
Yeah.
adding AI and stirring.
Yes.
And then we get these reports and where people say, well, we are doing this, but nobody is working shorter hours and we are not seeing any outcomes in productivity or cost saving. And but that's because you're adding AI and stirring. You're actually not looking at the one level up to say, what could we change? And
Ah.
that is a very, very, very large job, which is why technological innovations take so long to diffuse, to make
Hmm.
sense in that
Hmm.
sense, right? We
Yeah.
remember you are younger than I am, but I remember the early days of access to the web.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked in India in HCL, and
Mm.
there was one email address, HCL1 at VSNL, and it was with the the vice president of corporate communications. And I had HCL too, because I used to sometimes moonlight with him on the corporate website project.
Mm.
And in the early days, like any network, the nodes just weren't there. So the network effects were very difficult to realize.
Yes.
However, it was my familiarity with the using of the web as an early resource that
Mm.
found me a community of expats in Switzerland when I was being sent to Switzerland as a country manager. And I asked them all kinds of questions, and they had more answers than anyone in my organization was able to give me, right?
Wow.
So the connectivity created value, but it takes
Um,
a while. These were also early adopters. I was an early
mm.
adopter. So this was just early adopters trying to create value. But
Yeah.
then suddenly people started to use it elsewhere, outside work, and that kind of took off.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I remember the first time I had a Hotmail address. When I gave my email address to people, people actually thought the mail was spelled MALE and I was talking about something shady. So, you know, so
Sure. I
solving
get it.
problems and technological innovation being diffused across a broader swathe of society and business takes a lot more. And operating in those silos loses us the chance, even if it allows people to keep their jobs, it loses us the opportunity to realize and extract true value from a
Mm.
new technology, as it were.
True. Even I have been using AI, like I've been using Claude. I used to use
Hmm.
ChatGPT also, but I recently switched to Claude and I'm still using it, not really, restructuring or redesigning of how I could do things better as a solopreneur in that sense.
Yeah.
But I'm aware that there is a larger application that I could use it to actually streamline my whole life in terms of, work
Mhm.
especially. So right now it's still an assistant. I'm like, okay, this is what I'm thinking of, or this is the email. What should we write? You have all this
Yeah.
background or context from whatever we've talked about. So yeah, I
Yeah.
know what you mean, and you're right that it takes time for a lot of us to use it in that way to then get to a point where we see the one level up and like, oh, we can do these things as well.
Mm.
Mm.
But I think we must be a little wary of individual experiences somehow aggregating to organizational experience,
Of course.
right? How you and I operate as
Mm.
independent operators.
Yes.
Our workflows are quite different and they
Very.
rarely, if ever, collide with other people's.
Yeah.
To your earlier point, different functions,
Mm.
people's workflows in one function are constantly interacting with other people's workflows. So the aggregate is not the same as 5 people in finance, 5 people in marketing, add up to
Yeah.
10 people doing finance and marketing with the help of AI. It
Yeah.
is more about how do they interact and make something completely different. And
Mm.
I know we all kind of talk about this particular line of, that's attributed to Steve Jobs. There are no new ideas. There are just no new, you just put the same old ideas in new combinations.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes a lot of imagination, which I'm advocating in the book as one of the skills in the boardroom, because the hiring typically happens, oh, you worked in this big organization, made it to a CXO level.
Yeah.
You must be good. Come and join this board in the same or adjacent industry and give us all your gyan, right?
Mm.
Gyan
Sure.
being knowledge, all your
Yes.
wisdom, all of it. But when the use of technological tools or changes in how innovation is catalyzed by tech, organizational and industry sector boundaries are more blurred,
Mm.
right? So we have,
Mm.
for example, you must have this in Australia too. We have neobanks,
Okay.
basically things like, Starling, Monzo, and people call them neobanks because they don't come with the infrastructural baggage
Yeah.
of a very large bank, which has
Yeah.
old technology infrastructure, old processes. When two
Mm.
banks merge, they have a huge amount of digital and technological transformation to do and all of that. New banks don't have that baggage.
Mm.
So they can have, beautiful looking apps which actually work because they
Yes.
have a clean slate that they're designing things on,
Yeah.
right? Now,
Yeah.
their neobanks and banks are both regulated by the same regulators.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why are we giving them one title versus another? At which point do neobanks stop being neobanks and become banks?
Uh,
But at the same time, they're able to innovate quickly and compete with a lot more
yes.
players in the financial services market.
Yes.
For example, by offering a marketplace of various financial products from different suppliers,
Yeah.
which banks can't do for very many reasons,
Yes.
right? So when these boundaries are so blurred and new sectors and spaces are going to emerge, the question has to be asked, your 30 years of experience from the past, how relevant is it?
Yes.
And more importantly, how are you making it relevant? And that is where
Mm-hmm.
that metacognition that we just talked about becomes valuable. What
Mm-hmm.
is it that I can bring from there that applies in where this space is going? The
Mm.
uncharted spaces this particular sector is wading into.
Yes.
How do you,
Yes.
and that's not going to happen if you just want to add layers. You have to
Mm.
sometimes reimagine the whole thing.
Yes.
You have to
Yes.
ask imaginative questions, right?
Mm.
And that is our entire job, asking questions. Imagine getting paid to be asking questions.
Oh, you love that, don't you? But the thing is,
Yes.
you don't just ask questions; you also answer them. Which, yeah, I usually
But
excel at
help,
asking the questions.
helping, yeah. Helping other people find better answers,
Yes.
including myself.
Yes. Yeah.
Helping others find good answers, helping myself find good answers, asking questions. Just before we went live, I was reading something which is about an oil company where
Mm.
they are putting some resolutions to their shareholders. And
Yeah.
then when the shareholders approve them, the board basically wants to reject them.
Oh.
And in the print edition of and it's a listed company. So, and I have been a listed company director, I can tell you that that's serious business.
Yeah.
So in the print edition of the book, page 34, I have asked the question, who holds accountable those people who are holding the exec teams accountable? And this is a
Mm.
live example of exactly that happening. And the answer to that in brief is that they are voting agencies and they're the external stakeholders. They hold the boards accountable. But
Mm.
it is an interesting thing that, turtles all the way down, who's holding whom accountable,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that is really the challenge of the job, that you have to remain as transparent
Mm.
and as accountable as you can be, even if
Mm.
nobody is checking your homework.
Oh, sure. Yeah. If I had to ask you in terms of explaining to a layperson what a board member does, what would you say?
So, you know that organizations are run by executive teams. There's a CEO, there's a CFO, a CMO,
Yes.
CIO, increasingly CTO, and so on and so forth. Uh, they have the job of day to day running the
Mm.
organization, but
Mm.
they run the organization in alignment with an agreed strategy, which the
Mm.
board helps them,
Formulate. Mm.
collaboratively. They evolve the strategy. The board also wants to keep an eye on, do we have the right amount of money for all the dreams and plans we have? Do we have the right kind of people? And do we have the
Mm.
right numbers of people to make that strategic plan a reality?
Mm.
And then making sure, by keeping an eye on all the activities being done in the right way, that the organization retains the regulatory and the social licenses
Okay.
that enable the organization to operate, right?
Okay.
So
Okay.
if you're a regulated industry, Claire, you essentially have to obtain several clearances, permissions, and be in compliance with the regulations.
Mm.
Otherwise, the regulator will probably open an investigation and you might be hauled in front of various people, spend a
Mm.
lot of executive and non executive time dealing
Yeah.
with it. And also, social license. We forget that businesses operate because they have a social license to operate.
Yeah.
And when we see revolts against companies,
Yes.
that's exactly the social license being violated, the conditions of social license being violated. There are several examples in the book of a large multinational beverage company, for example,
Mm.
which has been alleged to contaminate arid countries, and also not in countries that are not arid. Water is a precious and essential commodity.
Oh, in
You can't
Australia. Oh my God.
contaminate. Yeah. I know, right? So you can't contaminate waterways. You can't
Mm,
contaminate drinking water bodies and
mm,
somehow still think you can operate, right? So that is the social licensing. So the board's job is to make sure that the resources are there, the right kind of people are there, and they
okay.
are operating in the manner that retains the business's right to operate, essentially.
Mm, You also have a lot of knowledge of history. Like, if you started talking about India, I'm sure you would say stuff that I'd be like, what? What are you talking about? Um, have boards always been around, or was this like, for example, did East India Company have a board? Like
Good
when did it
question.
evolve?
So for East India Company, I refer you to a gentleman called William Dalrymple,
Yes, of
who
course.
has written a book about it.
Yeah.
And, and most recently, the East India Company, the original one, was owned by a bunch of Indians, but that's a separate conversation.
Yes.
So, very good question. The word chairman, I know, dates back 3 or 4 centuries.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
essentially, a chairman is a person who sits on a higher chair and
Yes.
presides over the proceedings
Hmm.
around the table. But this is a very good question. I don't think I can answer that with any number of dates on it. I will
Sure.
say the current form of governance that we are operating under in the UK,
Hmm.
the correctives and the frameworks and the changes in governance date back only to the 1980s, to a
Oh,
report
wow.
called the
Sure.
Cadbury Review.
Okay.
And that happened after a major scandal where a business promoter essentially embezzled the funds that were set aside for their employees' pensions. So
Hmm.
that catalyzed a lot of governance reviews and changes and accountability mechanisms and so on. And the
Hmm.
change has been quite substantial. I mean, there is
Hmm.
a you know my I have quoted a chairman in the book. She started working when I was a toddler,
Sure.
and she has therefore been in finance and asset management industry and fund management industry for 50 years. And
Hmm.
she gave, therefore, a very interesting long arc comment where she said, in my time, it has changed from, my word is my bond, a trust based system,
Hmm.
to actually looking at compliance, like these are the regulations, you need to comply, and
Hmm.
essentially to a point where people have begun to do checklisting
Hmm.
and kind of doing rule based thing. Now, on this, I have to say that there are differences between how various jurisdictions operate.
Of
So
course.
the US traditionally has been more rule based, and we are more principle based in the UK. The principle based allows people to make judgment calls much more easy
Yeah.
than rule based does. If you think
Hmm.
about school rules, right? You either comply or you break them.
Yep. Yep.
Whereas if you're allowed to have some judgment, then you
Hmm.
look at the situation and you say, this is the correct way to proceed with these circumstances, versus if the circumstances were to be slightly different, these are the options that we would have
Yeah.
on the table. So
That
it
that sounds
allows
like
more judgment, more flexibility,
yeah.
right?
That sounds like life, decision making in life with like flexibility based on principles, based on the circumstances. So I feel the UK version is probably better in the long run.
Well, the UK, I mean, you know that the Australian governance follows the
Yes.
similar
Yes.
principles, and I
Yes.
do tackle that. It is very hard to ignore the colonial legacy of governance frameworks in
Yep.
many organizations, in many jurisdictions.
Hmm.
So there is the UK-ish system,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
there in India and Australia and the Commonwealth countries. And then there is an AHADA system, which governs 17 francophone countries in Africa
Okay.
for
Okay.
reasons you can work out, right?
Yeah.
And they work quite differently. And in fact, some of their operations, I have a very interesting conversation I've quoted in the book with someone who sits on both OHADA and Anglo-Saxon boards in the African
Ooh.
continent. And he explained the differences in how the
Oof.
mechanics of the meetings work, right? And their meetings sound quite similar, not identical, to how European boards operate even now.
Okay.
So it
Okay.
is really very interesting to know that when you enter a new governance context, I emphasize the value of the first 100 days. Like first 100 days, two eyes,
Huh.
2 ears, two hands, one nose.
Yep.
Listen, observe, take notes, ask questions,
Mm.
and then start to offer. Like, first
Mm.
learn the lay of the land.
Mm.
And it's
Mm.
really important to learn the lay of the land. And I have tried to, because I interviewed quite a lot of people around the world.
I can imagine,
So I
yeah.
have drawn, yeah, so I've drawn like compare and contrast where it was possible to say that when you enter a new governance system,
Mm.
learn to kind of figure out what is really going on before you start
Mm.
to put your tuppence in.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
that is really, really vital. The more complex the organization or the newer the governance
Sure.
context in which you're operating, the more important it is that you learn the lay of the land before you start to play.
Sure.
And minor things, they may seem like minor things, but they really are not. Like the stress that the CEOs carry, for example,
Mm.
it is underestimated, right?
Mm.
But at the same time, if there is a situation where the CEO is not coping and is having a mental breakdown,
Mm-hmm.
how do you stage an intervention,
Mm.
right? A lot
Yeah.
of people don't want to talk about it
Of course.
because,
Yeah.
but at the same time, both from a legalistic and a human point of view, there needs to be an intervention.
Mm. Of
Human
course.
point of view, because seriously, you're going to watch a person have a breakdown and not help them.
Mm.
And legalistically, a CEO is the officer of the company.
Yep.
They have the ability to make representations and commitments on behalf of the company.
Yep.
If their judgment is under duress
Yep.
and you don't really take any action, they will
Yeah.
commit you to things and then you
Yep.
have to comply with those, right? So it can
Sure.
create risks. And
Yeah.
at the same time, if they are not functioning, where is your second line of command in the
Mm.
organization? So these are like tricky things that are very rarely directly addressed.
Wow.
But having witnessed, I work with a lot of execs, both at the, the what I call the owner managed founder end, or
Mm-hmm.
the professional managed organizations. And I've seen these conditions, and it's really a difference between life and death of the organization,
Yeah.
whether the board, you know, steels themselves for it and
Wow.
compassionately actually asks open ended questions with
Hmm.
an aim to help the
Help.
person,
Yeah.
not to judge and condemn them. And I related, since we were talking about compare and contrast, when I started to talk about this, there are particular codified edicts in countries' governance where mental capacity is actually a basis for deciding whether you can remain a director or not.
Of course.
So,
Hmm.
depending on the
Makes
jurisdiction,
sense.
it
Huh.
could be a far more onerous thing for the board to choose to do or not do
Hmm.
to address the issue. And more CEOs are under so much pressure. The serial CEO is no longer the case. People don't want to be CEO one time after another. The
Hmm.
stress is so much, and there is so much, social media and press discussion
Oh,
about what CEOs get paid,
yes.
the scrutiny that is brought to their life, and all of it. I mean, it is real stress, and they are
Sure.
doing real jobs.
Yeah.
And therefore we are wading into very difficult spaces in the current time where everything gets multiplied and amplified rapidly.
Yes.
So the board has a job to be more alert and engaged and understand the context in which executive teams are operating.
Hmm. Hmm. Can I ask you why did you choose to write about boardrooms? Why, like, was it because of your experience? Why is the book about this and not about something else? Because you've had a varied career for several years. You've worked across India, UK, Europe, like all over the world. So,
So two or three things happened. One was that a friend of mine who has had a very serious career in a
hmm,
very male dominated industry called me in 2024 and asked me a question. She said, if you were starting out in boardrooms today, how would you start? And I couldn't give her an answer because
hmm,
my start in boardrooms came from a program called the Board Apprentice Program, which hasn't scaled into boardrooms because host boards actually don't always appear. There are
huh,
people who want to be board apprentices. Someone's got to want them in the boardroom as an
yeah,
apprentice, right?
okay,
So that wasn't available. So I then wanted to find out how are other people around the world doing this. So
Mm.
that was one. The second thing was that this is my 11th year on boards, and the 10 years that I have had have been super eventful.
Mm-hmm.
Super eventful, as in, I have been part of an IPO, I have been part of an acquisition, I have been part of a massive merger between two FTSE 250 companies that created a FTSE 100 company. Um, I'm on the board of a fund where we did fund manager change in the first lockdown between
Oof.
April and August, when people barely knew how to make Zoom work, right?
Yeah.
And
Wow.
we were doing fund manager beauty parade and presentations and everything on Zoom. So it was
Wow.
quite an interesting experience.
Okay.
Also, other crises, and of course, when the first lockdowns of COVID came,
Mm.
different organizations were prepared to different levels, and it was basically all shoulders to the tiller, and the boards were working flat out. The serious boards were working flat out. So that was a shared calamity that we all experienced as well.
Yeah.
And in addition, I mean, I've had both, positive and negative, large, serious experiences, plus
Of
a lot
course.
of people stuff. I was writing out all the people related things I have done in the last 10 years. I have
Mm-hmm.
done more hiring, more crisis management, more conversations around, motivation, leadership qualities, all of this in the last 10 years that I had done prior to that. So there was a lot of material. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm also seeing a trend that younger people, millennials,
Mm-hmm.
and also executives who are not at the C level and may not have the ambition to get there,
Mm-hmm.
are interested in being on boardrooms. Now, why is it
Oh.
important, you would say?
Oh. Okay.
Because boards are there to serve for future generations. And if the future generations want a part on the board, I mean,
Mm.
boards have to kind of shift and make space, a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they have the same questions. How do I get
Yeah.
started? What should I be concerned about? And, all of this stuff.
Got
So
it.
there was quite a lot of stuff. But at the same time, there is also the impression that boards just kind of do box ticking, compliance, this, that, and the
Yes.
other. Whereas
Yes.
the circumstances we are in have never, I mean, of course, everybody says, oh, we have weathered much tighter, tougher circumstances. But
Mm-hmm.
everything that's going on with respect to technology,
Mm.
geopolitics, climate change, and the action that is required, all of them acting at once and deeply interconnected,
Yep.
is an experience that nobody who's in boardrooms today has actually had. I was listening to,
Wow.
there's a very high profile investor. I was listening to his podcast and I read his writings as well. And he was talking about the 1980s. And I just
Mm-hmm.
told you about the chairman I have quoted who has spent 50 years in the fund management industry. There are
Mm-hmm.
people like that. But it's not that people don't have individual experiences, like the oil crisis of the 1970s.
Yeah.
Yes, but the oil crisis of the 1970s lasted only so long because
Yep.
of XYZ factors.
Yeah.
Right now, what we are looking at is very different. So the
Mm.
idea is if you're dealing with the melange of these factors, you
Mm.
are in, what the title of the book says, you are in uncharted
That,
spaces.
that was going to be
And
my next
therefore,
question.
right? Therefore, if you are in uncharted spaces, how do you deal with what is ahead of you when you are responsible for stewarding financial, environmental, social, etc. resources? You are overseeing executives who are doing the work of keeping the businesses running. Your
Mm.
job is to make sure that you keep the business relevant in the long term. All
Mm.
of this is in flux. So there was just so much going on that I thought, okay, I think this is the time to put a stake in the ground and say, this
Okay.
is what currently happens.
Okay.
And I have a chapter each on tech, geopolitics, and climate change,
Mm-hmm.
and then making some recommendations on how you reset the agenda, which is what you
Mm.
talk about, and how you reimagine the boardroom, which
Mm.
is
Yeah.
whom do you talk to all of this stuff about around your boardroom table. So
Mm.
that was basically why I wrote about boards per se. It's not just about boards. One of my endorsers is a 22-year-old, and his view is that on reading this book, he could actually see
Mm-hmm.
some of the things he can apply in his life
Yes,
as well.
yes,
Right.
yes, yeah. There is, I will come back to that. There is
Hmm.
a term, there's a phrase that even I grew up hearing, and the first time I heard it, I was like, oh, this is
Hmm.
fascinating. And you use it as well. Trust
Hmm.
in God, but lock your car. Where
Yes.
does that come from, and how has that served you?
I mean, it's not just a question of serving me. I mean, we have nothing works without trust, right?
Mm.
And I have a friend whose book is coming out in September, and
Mm-hmm.
the book is called Rehumanizing Trust. And that's a book I would, I'm making very advanced recommendation to your audience and to you to consider. Essentially, without trust, there is nothing. We have to
Mm.
trust that the process works. We trust regulated industries, or we trust medication that comes out of a foil because we believe that the processes that check for its safety work,
Yes,
right?
yes.
But when you're signing annual accounts, when you're signing a compliance report, lock your card is about verification.
Ah,
You ask for evidence that not only was this done, show me that it was done.
yeah.
Assure me that it was done,
Mm.
right? So trust in God, but lock your car is don't begin by distrust. Begin by trusting that this works and this doesn't work, but ask for evidence.
Mm. Cool. I heard that first time when I was probably a teenager, and I was like, that is cool. Like, I didn't know the application of how I would end up using it in life, but yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
essentially, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Excellent.
And
So
it is
yeah,
also problematic if you're an atheist or agnostic. But anyway, we'll not
I
go there.
but since we've already gone there, I was recently having I mean, not an argument, but someone posted something on Instagram, and I essentially said they said that I'm an atheist and I don't believe in anything, that's spiritual or God or whatever. And I was like,
Mm.
yeah, but you have a belief. It is still a belief. It is still faith or in something else. And they were
Mm.
adamant. They're like, no, no, but I don't believe. And I'm like, but you believe in the not believing. So it was
Mm.
interesting to have that
Yeah.
conversation.
Atheism is its own church, as we
It
know
is
from the.
exactly that's
Yeah.
what I was saying.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I have
yeah.
described somebody who's quite vocally an atheist, almost militantly atheist, as the Ayatollah of atheism. So I'll claim my my coinage right here on your podcast.
Well done. That is amazing. Yeah. Okay, now going back to that previous thing
Mhm.
about the book. How can someone like me, for example, use the book to, help? I don't have a board. It's just me. I'm a solopreneur. I've been a independent contractor, freelancer for 22 years. What are one or two things that someone like me could take from the book? Because honestly, I look at the book and I feel like highlighting like so much stuff in the book, which I feel is relevant. But I also feel that because of the way you are, you go into so much of depth, and you, like you said, you've done your research, you've interviewed people from all over the world. What are like one or two things that a person like me could, work with?
So, since you're highlighting so much, I think you have part of the answer already. And I will step outside the frame of the book to say that even solopreneurs can create their own board of directors. They're not
Okay.
people who will hold you accountable, but you can have a group of people
Hmm.
that you go to bounce off ideas and who can give you challenge, who can give you support, which is basically what boards do.
Huh.
A lot
Okay.
of people who work by themselves have a council of people
Hmm.
whom they go to bounce off ideas. You know this
Okay.
about me. I have quite a few of them
Yes.
that I go to and ask questions. And it may not be the same people all the time
Hmm.
or for
Hmm.
everything,
Yeah.
but it is worth considering, even as a solopreneur. How do you don't just like circulate ideas in your head? How do you bounce them off some people who understand you, who trust you, with whom you
Hmm.
don't have to have daily contact, but who are
Hmm.
just like board directors don't have daily contact with the execs, but who
Hmm.
can help you clarify your thinking, hold you accountable to things that you want to do, challenge some of the assumptions that are baked into the plans that you have. So that's
Hmm.
something you could do.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing is to remember that everything that is applicable to the context, business context for boards, is also applicable to a solopreneur. The business context really matters,
Mm.
right? So, for example, if somebody is a small business, let's say on a crafts platform that we are all familiar with, if they
Mm.
can't source their materials, their pricing will change. And that
Yeah.
will show up in consumer pricing, and
Mm.
that will affect the demand that there is for their products.
Mm.
So, this idea of, oh, geopolitics doesn't affect me
Oh
isn't
no.
really true, right?
Oh,
I mean,
it
New Deal,
does.
for example, you work with paint.
Yep. Oof. Yeah.
Everything in paints, the additives
Everything.
and everything,
Yes.
they are byproducts of oil.
Yes.
And therefore, it may not look like it, but the war in West Asia is very real for you in
Yes.
Australia
Yes.
when you're making something like the artifact you have behind you on the wall, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
understanding the connectivity between things and how
Mm.
they affect you. The other thing that I talk about in the book, which might be of interest to you and to your audience,
Mm-hmm.
is the epistemic crisis we are in, which is not knowing facts,
Mm. Yep. Yep.
right? And I quote the tweet of the owner of a certain platform who said, our job is to make sure, this is paraphrasing, is to make sure people have the right kind of information.
Right.
Those are dangerous words. And
Mm.
the erosion of the fact base is not a theoretical construct in my head.
It isn't. Mm.
I was I'm trying to recall the story, but there is often a case when someone says, well, these people just, they are very good at it, referring to somebody in a given country, oh, they are very good at lobbying. And I'm like, do you know
Mm-hmm.
that they didn't invent it?
Mm-hmm.
The original inventors of this particular thing were people like this. And you know that there is a legend that the word lobby actually comes from the parliamentary lobby here, where you
Oh.
go, you can meet, you leave a card in the pigeonhole for your MP,
Uh-huh.
and your MP is obligated to meet you, and they meet you in the lobby. You're lobbying your MP. So
Ah.
there are little things like that, which, because people don't have any fact bases, and that's sometimes related to the onslaught of the flood of information on social media, which people are scrolling through and it's not sticking in their heads,
Yep.
and they have nothing to stick it to because they didn't collect enough facts.
Yep.
And lack of curiosity.
Oh yes.
There is a kind of lack of curiosity which people do not people don't pursue any idea to
Mm.
figure out what is going on, where did this come from, and
Mm.
that affects all of us.
Mm.
You cannot have conversations
Mm.
because people aren't bringing any facts, they are not bringing any stories, they're bringing opinions that are rooted in their preferences rather
Yes.
than anything reality wise or truthful.
Mm.
So it degrades public discourse.
Yes.
And when it degrades public discourse, it degrades democracies. I will go as far as saying that.
Mm.
So, in that sense, a lot of things which you said you've been highlighting, they relate to your context, my context, a
Mm.
lot of people's context. And one of the things that I have learned, and I do not think I have written it up in those words in the book, anybody can be on the board of a company and everything is fine. It is when the proverbial hits the fan that you realize who's able to cope. And at the
Mm.
moment, a whole bunch of proverbials are hitting the fan.
Yes.
So you need people to be alert. You need people to remain calm so that they can actually think through it. And when you
Yeah.
construct a board of different people, of
Mm.
a range of temperaments and everything, there's some people who are great in wartime. There's some people who are great in peacetime.
Yes.
Don't send the peacetime people to deal with war.
Yes.
But do you have enough of both kinds? And do you
Yeah.
actually know who's which kind? Right?
Yeah.
So in a similar way, operating in, as a solopreneur or as a creative, you recognize on your council of advisors, your board,
Mm-hmm.
your personal
Mm-hmm.
board,
Mm-hmm.
who is good for what,
Yes. Yes.
and
Yeah.
go to them for the relevant things. And that
Yeah.
is why construction of the board whether it is at your personal level or at a company level, is important. You bring people who are relevant, you bring people who complement one another, who will
Hmm.
disagree with one another in a constructive way, and then you hope to make the best of the circumstances given the information you have
Hmm.
and how swiftly you need to move. All of those judgment calls are important.
Hmm. How does someone like me get started building or connecting that council or building a board? I mean, genuinely, because now I'm like, I should do this. I'm 45. I should have done this a long time ago. And you should be the
Well,
chairperson,
I
by the
mean,
way.
yeah, you could, I mean, you can start anywhere. Think about what is it that you need, uh, what is it that you need support for.
Hmm.
There's a chairman that I quote in the book who said when there is a founder who has a board made up of investor directors, let's say they
Huh.
raise money from many people,
Yeah.
all investor directors represent the interest of the investors,
Yeah.
and they don't want a chairman because they
Hmm.
just want to run the conversation, right?
Yes.
The founder, on the other hand, wants an independent chairman to both counsel them, support them, etc., but also
Huh.
serve as a buffer and help them navigate the conflicting agendas of the investor directors on their board, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So think of
Okay.
yourself as the founder. If
Huh.
you're going to assemble various people,
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that as individuals we call these board meetings, but
Of
how
course.
will you, when people give you conflicting advice, how will you make sense of that advice? That sense making becomes important. So
Hmm.
identify, think about what is it that you need support for,
Hmm.
what is it that you would like challenge for, who is
Hmm.
it that you would like to do blue sky thinking with, and pull
Hmm.
together. That is your advisory board.
Hmm. Cool. Thank you. That is very helpful. And I feel like, there is, for example, there is a client of mine in the Barossa Valley, and she has been most kind. Last year she hired me 5, 6 assignments for her for photography. And this year I recently, about a month and a half, 2 months ago, I posted a video saying that one of the things as a freelancer, I have always felt is that I don't have anyone to talk to. I don't have
Mm,
anyone I can bounce ideas off of, or even just say that, oh, this is what happened during my day, and, kind of making sense of that. And she saw that video, and she immediately DM'd me on Instagram saying, hey, once a week, half an hour, let's get on a call. And she has been doing that for the last 2 weeks. And it's just also because Australia is such a new place for me. So for her providing that context for me to understand where I need to start, what are the gaps, and for me to even have a vision, because right now I almost feel like I'm in survival mode where I'm just trying to make it work from day to day, running the business in that sense.
mm,
So for her to actually say that, oh, what's your vision in like 5 years? Work backwards from that. Just having, it's not that I don't know about it, but just having someone say that makes a lot of difference.
yeah. So she is
Yeah.
essentially, the beginnings of your own personal board.
Most,
That's
yeah.
basically what the job is.
Yeah, yeah. I'm so grateful. I mean, I've not met a lot of people, but there are women, in Melbourne. There's a chef friend of mine. She was the first person on the podcast, and she will sometimes, I'll be like, oh, I'm trying to launch this product. What do you think about it? And she'll take time out from her day, do a video call, tell me about it. So it's actually been pretty cool that I'm experiencing this now that I'm in Australia. I don't really feel like I experienced this when I was in India, except with you at a point, when we used to talk about stuff. But I have not really ever had that. And when I was 23, 24, just out of B school, I used to daydream that, oh, I wish there was someone who could just, like tell me that, okay, the overall, that this is what you're good at. Because the daily thing, yes, I can do that. But just having someone being able to look at me with the bigger picture of everything that I do, yeah, cool. Very, very interesting.
Yes. I mean, it's always worth bouncing things off people and back to trust in God, but lock your
Mhm.
car.
Love your
People
card.
whose particular lenses you trust, whose judgment you trust, which you can, bring to bear in certain things. And people will challenge you also. If you talk
Yes,
regularly to people, they will call your nonsense out.
yes.
They will also give you some direction. And, you know, you just said that you had never experienced this till you came to Australia. Well, Australia is your uncharted spaces. How
It
many
is.
people have the, yeah, how many people have the courage to uproot everything and move to another country and start again? So this is your uncharted spaces. You have a great opportunity in a new continent with a new culture, different kinds of people, and you're already seeding a lot of different things.
Yes,
You're experimenting, like I've seen that you have an Adelaide collective. So
yes,
you're building your community
mm,
locally in person,
yes.
which is also vital because in the real world we are not
Oh,
going to
yes.
eat bits and bytes. We are really going to eat food, and it's helpful to break bread with somebody else
Oh,
as
it is
well.
I feel
So
that's the best part about the internet, that yes, you make
mm,
a initial connection here, but the end goal for me has always been to meet in person.
yeah, so
Yeah.
you're already doing that. So the
Mm.
book is for you as much as it is for people who do what I do.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I found really interesting about the book also, because even though, for example, I don't really interact with boards or people who are chair people or that kind of stuff, it was still interesting for me because there were things I would read and they were quite relatable for someone like me. So in that sense, yeah. Where is the book launch happening today evening?
So this evening in London, the book launch is happening at the Shard, and it's
Ooh,
obviously a
ooh.
very, yes, I know. The
That,
Shard is actually, yeah. You remember the Shard? I mean, I remember the space where the Shard is from when it wasn't there, and
ooh.
everybody told the guy who made it that it wasn't possible.
Oh,
So
wow.
it is an embodiment of doing something that everyone told you was impossible, and he did it anyway. So it is happening in the Shard, and the building obviously has like airtight security, as it were. So I have an interesting guest list, and
Ooh.
Fiona, who's written the foreword to the book, is going to be there, and Sarah, who's the CEO of Amper, who's hosting the launch in their office. They are in the Shard.
Ooh,
So Sarah is going to be welcoming everybody into their home. And then a lot of my friends and my family and my work colleagues, my very first chairman when I was a board apprentice, quite a
ooh.
few of my board colleagues will be able to attend. And there is a community of women directors who have all signed up to come and, join me at the launch. So it is this evening in London, yes.
Excellent. Congratulations. I wish I could have been there. It would have been most amazing. And I would have taken lovely photographs. And I hope to see photos though, right? There will be someone taking photos of
Yes.
the launch. And I need a
Yes.
photo
Yeah.
of you with
Since
the
you weren't
book.
here, I do have a professional photographer in London, and he will
Excellent.
be taking pictures. And yes, so you will see photos. Yeah.
Yes, I am looking forward to that. And again, many congratulations. We are on the 1 hour mark.
Thank you. And thank you for
Thank
having
you.
me on your podcast. It's great to chat with you, Nana, and
I
do
know.
it across time zones and everything. This is
I
wonderful.
know. Thank you so much. So early in the morning for you, and you're like, yes, we'll do it. And I was like, yes, that's the way. Tomorrow I'm doing a podcast at 8 a.m. my time, so I get it. Yeah.
So you
Thank you
know.
so much, Shefaly. Love you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.